Yay. Hello and welcome everyone to our 18th episode of A Girl Like Me Live, which is the Well Project's live streaming series advancing health and wellness discussions and education among women living with and vulnerable to HIV. Every 2 weeks, I, CRCC Colvin, will sit down with different co-hosts to chat about key topics in our community. In today's episode, I'm so excited and so honored to sit and talking with attorney Mandisa Moore-O'Neal out of Louisiana, and we're speaking HIV and criminalization among women living with HIV. This is a very important conversation to be had, especially at this time, Black Maternal Health Week, and I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so stoked as well.
Oh, come on, go ahead, introduce yourself so we can jump in.
Hello, I'm Mandisa Moore-O'Neal. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm based in New Orleans. I'm a sixth generation New Orleanian, which is always important to say because like such a tenet of the construct of Blackness in this country is displacement and not having a home and not having roots. I'm always very proud and very honored to say, like, in spite of that, there are people who make roots, and to have lived on this land for as long as we have is always just an honor. And it's always an honor, like, to also do this work in my home and in a place that, you know, was also my ancestral home. And so I'm just stoked to be in this conversation. As was mentioned, I'm a Black feminist attorney, which to me means that how I lawyer is informed by my Black feminist principles. For me, a Black feminism is a legal strategy as much as it is a political practice and an organizing strategy. It's not just something that you see on a t-shirt. It's actually a means of seeing people. It's a lens. It's a way that actually opens up as opposed to restricting. So I'm excited to be here. I'm a member of a really amazing state coalition that I want to shout out, LCCH, which is Louisiana Coalition on Criminalization and Health. We're trying to do our part to address criminalization as it pertains to HIV and other health conditions in Louisiana. And so I'm just excited that I'm a part of this amazing coalition.
Oh, yay. Black feminist lawyer doing Black Maternal Health Week. It feels so good to be seen and to be able to have this conversation. So to just jump straight in, criminalization and women living with HIV. So I can tell you from someone that is not a lawyer, just in my personal experience, what criminalization has felt like. Criminalization from the onset of diagnosis was, hey, if you don't tell someone you're living with HIV and you sleep with them, then that's up to like 10 years in jail and a felony. So of course that had me just disclosing to everybody because I didn't want to go to jail. And you know how many unsafe situations I could have been in because felt like I was being forced to disclose. Or, you know, when it came to the breastfeeding stuff, if you breastfeed your child, then there's the propensity that DHS will be called on you. So where I have not had to have any interactions with these entities, now that is coming up because of a choice that I have decided to make with my body and my children. So as an attorney, do you come across any, like, what does criminalization in HIV look like from your lens?
Thank you for sharing that, first of all. So my experience, and I want to say, like, I am 100% an attorney, and long before I was an attorney, I was an organizer and an activist doing mostly reproductive justice and anti-violence work in the New Orleans area. And in many ways, like, that really grounded why I became a lawyer and the type of lawyer that I am. And it also informs, like, the things that I say. So of course I will be speaking as a lawyer, but also as an organizer, and somebody who is who's invested in liberation. And so yes, like I've definitely seen all of that. And for me, HIV is one of the ways that I see Black women and Black people who give birth and who parent are criminalized. And as you were talking about like the experience of disclosing and like in the potential of being in like potentially violent situations, I was thinking that's the point. It, like that's the point of criminalization. It's to control you, it's to restrict you, it's to enact violence because you aren't supposed to do anything outside of what the system tells you to do. And if you think that you get to have sexual partners and be free, no, like I will make sure like that there's some rule, some policy in place, some law in place that restricts what you're able to do. Oh, you now have a baby? Well, I have other rules in place to restrict you. And so, you know, in Louisiana, I've seen like it was one situation where maybe the intentional exposure statute, which is antiquated and shouldn't even exist, maybe that's not what a person is initially arrested for. But after some investigation, that charge is then added, right? So, for example, in a situation like where maybe there's a battery charge, then suddenly after 2 weeks, this HIV intentional exposure statute is then added. So it's very clear that it's not really about safety, it's about punishing you for doing something. It's about like, so in this situation, the person was actually in self-defense of an intimate partner violence situation. Hey, baby. And so it was a part of punishing her for defending herself and her children from her abusive ex. And again, even though he was the one who attacked her, now that this charge is added, now she's the predator, right? Because in this paradigm, it's only two people, right? Good, bad. It's only two types of people: predators, perpetrators, and victims. If people are either undeserving of our support, our compassion, our sympathy because they somehow fall out of alignment, or they're deserving. So in that dichotomy, there was no way to be human and gray and nuanced and complex. Now she's the person who is the perpetrator, so to speak. Even though the fact that she was experiencing intimate partner violence is now not a part of the question because of her HIV status and the ways that it, is used against her. So like that's just an example, but it's indicative of what I know is not just happening here. And also it's indicative of how unsatisfactory our law is at addressing the justice that we actually need. At most, that was able to be dropped, that charge, which was good. She wasn't in jail, she's not incarcerated, she didn't have a pending charge. Those are positive things. And that's so not the full story of what was needed to make her whole. So to me, it's also an opportunity to point out, okay, at best, at most, this is what the law can do. And let's be clear, we can't put all of our eggs in this basket because at the end of the day, this was happening because of like the context of gentrification post-Katrina and housing. Part of why she was with them for the time is because housing was really scarce and certain choices were made based on crappy options. And so to me, taking all of that into consideration, that's what, like, he exploited the fact that she was housing vulnerable. So to me, justice is taking into account displacement, taking into account lack of jobs that treat like a human, number one, and pay a living, thriving wages. So to me, it's a chance just to reflect on things that we actually need to keep us safe.
Absolutely. As you were speaking, I think of something my therapist said to me one time, and she explained like my HIV diagnosis and other traumas that I was experiencing, like HIV being the tip of the iceberg. That's what
Yeah.
you can see and everyone else can see. But there were so many other structural things that led me to an HIV
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis. And
Mm-hmm.
as I talked to more and more people within the community and outside of the community, being a child of people who were using drugs back in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and living in poverty and being a child of an immigrant and all of these, different things, which should be addressed outside of HIV, but it's like not until HIV becomes a factor and then you're shamed because of that
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis
Yep.
and you're criminalized because of that diagnosis in some instances. And it's very unfortunate because these are vulnerable populations we are talking about. And when you start talking about Black women, we are often left out, and our needs, concerns, wants, desires are often overlooked. And so to be that child, and to make it out of that, now to be an adult and to try to maneuver through my own family and everything, there are still hurdles and obstacles that I'm not even receiving, from the people I thought I would receive it from, which is, just the community, those my neighbors or people I work with or something. Now it's coming from things that are scary, like my
Mm-hmm.
providers and the law. And
Listen.
it's so disheartening. And the stigma of HIV just it enhances every piece of this. And it just feels really good to know that there are lawyers, attorneys, providers that I feel like are on our side, because at some point you feel like you don't have anybody on your side.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for being engaged in this conversation
Oh,
today.
thank you.
Oh, this is great. So,
It can always be more of us, though. It can always be more of us. Thank you for saying that. And I received the thank you. And for me, I'm just doing like my life's work, which is like, like I just think to um Harriet Tubman, and like she was a freedom fighter, she was a general, she was a leader. But before she was any of those things, she was a dreamer. Because like you had to dream that freedom was possible in order to go towards it and to like actualize it. And so I appreciate that. And it needs to be more of us. It needs to be more, like it shouldn't be um unique thing. Like it should be so many attorneys out here, so many people who are in the social work field that we have worked ourselves out of a job. And for me, I just want to be clear, that's my goal. Lawyering for me is a tool. It's not the end all be all, and it will never it's never the end game. The end game is freedom. The end game is liberation. And this, again, at its best, is a tool that can keep you out of jail, hopefully, as you actualize freedom. I'm not saying that you can't be free in cages, you know what I mean? But just like acknowledging that, like, my job is to just support and like, you know, things along the way that may be an extra hindrance. But I just want to say, I wish it was more of us, not to invisibilize those of us who are out there, who oftentimes, to me, aren't doing the sexy work. Like you'll never see, um, like folks know, I guess, Benjamin Crump, or like folks who represent families of those who are not incarcerated, who have been murdered by the cops. And not to take away from that, I will say, like, for every one attorney who you see that, is on TV and has visibility, is so many other of us doing like the unsexy work that's never going to be televised. At the end of the day, as you were saying about Black women in particular, that's not something that, or like working class women, undocumented women, like that's not the kind of stuff that's going to make the news. And it's people who are involved in that. So I just want to acknowledge, I do wish it was more of us. And also, like, for those of us who are out there, it's, it's not very visible a lot of the time.
And that's why conversations like these are so important. I can just imagine, I've been positive now for almost 14 years. And there were points, especially at the beginning of my diagnosis, living down south, young Black girl. I didn't feel like there were other people that I could look to, like, especially not anybody on a provider type level of any, no professional, and no one that would listen to my desires, my wants, my anything. I fell quickly into that, that internal stigma that we feel because of how I was being treated by those on the outside of me, beginning at their diagnosis marker. Like, they were so hopeless when I got diagnosed. So thank you. I can only imagine, the person that is newly diagnosed or the person that is struggling in any facet of their life right now, just seeing this conversation, I could imagine how beneficial that could be for that individual. And we talk often about providers need to hear this stuff from other
They
providers.
sure do.
Lawyers need to hear this stuff from
They
other
sure do.
lawyers.
We sure do.
Catherine, we just talked about that this morning. So, even though there may be a small, maybe sometimes invisible set of these people, I think that just continuing to share the work in your networks, and hopefully, it'll be a snowball effect and you will work yourself out of a job. I'm not hoping it for you, but
I want to be out of a job. Let me be very clear. I want to be out of a job. And like that, and I also want to be clear, I'm an abolitionist. So like the like paradigm of being an abolitionist, particularly in this, summer 2020 moment where I'm upset that abolition somehow became a conversation solely about defund the police, which to me is watering down, so much work, so many layers of work into this like one phrase that was palatable to people who are continuously funding law enforcement. Let's be clear. So the stuff like that y'all were talking about, you wasn't even doing, but that's a whole nother conversation. But like, as an abolitionist, I am very, very clear that I must work as if abolition is possible next week, even though I understand it may not be achieved in my lifetime. So part of what I understand it means being an abolitionist is that like I'm working as if there's one day in which I won't have to lawyer, even if that won't be actualized in my lifetime. It's still the goal. Like I think of again, like I'm always quoting Black women because I am brilliant, and that brilliance comes from the Black women who have written things for us and have shared their voices with us, and that I've been able to soak in their brilliance. I think of Zora Neale Hurston, an amazing anthropologist from the Deep South. And my favorite quote by her is when she said, jump at the sun. She said, Mama always told us, jump at the sun. You may not make it, but at least you'll get off the ground. And that just grounds my abolitionist dreams. Even if it's something that can't be achieved in my lifetime, I will jump as if I can do that shit next week. See, I said I wouldn't curse, and I'm sorry. But so I'm sorry, but 20 minutes in, I'm proud of myself. But what you said about your journey, and somebody who is living with HIV, it struck something in me, CC, because something like that I experienced is when we often talk about criminalization, how I was introduced to the conversation is it was all about law enforcement, right? And the government. And that's true. Like, they are the agents, the ones who arrest you and actually have the power to keep you in cages. But something that I've had to learn is to really, really address criminalization, I have to abolish the cop inside of me. And that's not to say that I am a law enforcement officer, but it is to say I was raised in the US. I was raised in a society that polices everything, that is built on policing Blackness. So I would be silly. It is built on policing Black women's wombs. So it would be silly of me to think that somehow, because I'm liberated, I don't have to do that work. And so I think of that in terms of when you talk about service providers and the ways that service providers, lawyers, doctors, folks in the medical profession, social workers have also internalized these ideas about criminalization. And then it plays out when someone comes, like you said, newly diagnosed at their desk or comes for services. So once I understood that criminalization isn't just something that cops do or the government does, but it's something that I also have a role in, and that I actually have the power to check my assumptions. Like just thinking of what happens in an ER when like a Black infant comes in with the mark, and oftentimes an assumption gets made about what happened to that baby in ways that don't always happen with like someone white or somebody who's owning class. You know what I mean? Just thinking about how there are so many instances of criminalization that no, it wasn't somebody was arrested in a warrant. A social worker called the cops on that person. You know what I mean? A doctor called, like had a really wild interpretation of what being a mandatory reporter is, and decided that this spot meant this child was being abused, as opposed to that child is active and fell. So once I understood that like criminalization is something like that we all can participate in and can actually stop, it also shifted what accountability meant. Because that's something like that I see, especially when a conversation about HIV and Black women and criminalization, is the role that other state agencies such as Child Protective Services play. Like I know the Well Project has a lot of resources and information on this topic, as do other groups, but that to me is a big area. Thinking of immigration, thinking of like how many ICE raids happen at home. Home is a very gender space that society says is the women's space. Therefore, immigration is a gender justice issue. Like,
there's no way I could follow up with. I mean, we could all just sit here and listen to you all day. Yes, tell me more about this gendered space now. That's
I'm
crazy.
thinking of exactly like of what I'm trying to keep up with the comments. Of what Catherine said about most women who live with HIV are reported to CPS by their healthcare and social service providers. Something like that. I like in a conversation about HIV criminalization, a conversation about any criminalization, that's a gendered conversation, because reproductive violence, or this violence based on controlling how you reproduce, when you reproduce, who it's for, and the purpose, that is inherently one that requires criminalization to happen. Like to me, like when I think of criminalization, that's a form of control. I'm telling you what you get to do with your body. I tell you what's public space. No. I get to walk down the street. You do not. You walk down the street is assume you're a sex worker and you're treated as such. Out down the street, I just get to be. Like that's criminalization, this idea like that you have to stay in line, and when you don't, you're punished. But when you do, you're still punished. So that's the gag.
Whoa, major gag. So you're dealing with those two, things, and then the internalized stigma that the person is already feeling. So all of these things compounded together are the recipe for a very, very bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
And, thinking of CPS and how that would fall back on me, as the mom of these
Mm-hmm.
two children. And I've never had any run-ins except for that one time when I got locked up when I was like 19, but I only stayed there for a few hours because I didn't have car insurance. Okay, so that was a poverty thing. Ended up in jail
Criminalizing poverty.
on my way to class at the University of Georgia, and my car insurance lapsed, and that ended up I missed that Friday class and everything, but it's okay, it's
So
cool, we got
sorry.
it back. But no other run-ins with law enforcement or anybody else. And now my parenting, which it's hard sometimes to even have full confidence in that because everybody's already looking at you under this microscope. Are you doing the right thing? Why would you even want to have kids if you're living with HIV? Why would you want to da 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 da? How did you get pregnant? Like that question, how did you get pregnant? Those types of things. And now at such a very vulnerable time to even have anything about CPS. Like I know I was raised, you don't talk to them people. You don't talk to the
Oh
social
no.
workers. Don't tell them your business because that is the fear is that, they're going to become way too involved. And that involvement could potentially end with the child no longer being with the parent, which is scary. A lot of us are just, getting it how we live. We doing it. And these kids are fine and well loved, but it just may look different, to someone else on the outside. And then to compound that with HIV, it's like just because I had unprotected my story. I had unprotected sex that time. I didn't ask for HIV. This is
Mm-hmm.
something, an STD, STI that I came across. Other people were not criminalized for things like herpes or chlamydia, things like that. But because it is HIV, now you have so much reign over my life. I felt like at one point, I couldn't do certain careers because of my HIV status. I couldn't, be in certain spaces because of that. And to see that it is backed up in so many different places by law and policy is so disheartening. Make me not want to talk to nobody, like really, who can I trust? I can't go into my provider's office and tell them exactly what's going on at home because this may open me up to some scrutiny that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not quite prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
So this is such a heavy but much needed conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We've been missing a lot of comments. I wanted to go back. Olivia asked you to unpack something a while
Oh,
ago.
I missed that. What she
Oh,
said?
can you talk a bit more about abolition for folks who may be newer to the term?
Why, yes, I can. It's my one of my favorite conversations. Um, so yeah, like everything I say, um, I'm deeply influenced by Black feminism, by Indigenous feminism. Um, my first introduction to abolition was when I was 20 years old, talking about an adequate response to sexual violence, and me being baby Mandisa, much like just as fiery now as I was then. I was like, oh, well, men should be castrated. Like that is the proper response to rape, to sexual violence. And having like a fellow Black feminist like really challenge me on this of like why it feels good to have that kind of punitive response, and how that's not actually like ultimately addressing or repairing damage that's been like has been done. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was the first time I was like, I'd heard the term abolition outside of history books, talking about like the abolitionist movement of the mid 1800s, which is where I thought the term started and ended was 1865. Did not know that, it's a term that actually exists. It's a framework. So basically, abolition is the idea that not only should there not be prisons, not be cages, not be that kind of, of punitive responses to harm, but ultimately abolition is questioning a society that says prisons are the way to deal with these things. So it's not just about the cages that have to go. How did we construct an entire society that said this is what you do? So in order for that to happen, that's going to need us to really dismantle many aspects, including CPS, including this empire that says that Amazon workers will pay more in taxes than Jeff Bezos does. Like, that is also a fundamental part of abolition, because again, thinking of your example earlier of you said it was your brake tag or something. It was something that had expired. It was something
Insurance.
That to me is connected in the sense of, you don't pay people for their labor, and you don't pay people for their labor, yet you still have all these requirements of what, if you have a car, which you have to have a car to get to work, all these things that are needed to exist, but they cost money. But we know what we pay you versus what we could pay you is different. And so you do these things that you have to do in order to live the life that you have to live. And so then wages are low, mandated to be low all across the country. There's intense union busting, like millions of dollars being spent to stop organizers from, or like workers from organizing, right? That thing gets used against you. Oh, can't afford insurance, I'm in jail. You know what I mean? And this is not the sole experience of why people engage in sex work. I'll say that from the beginning. Maybe one of the reasons why is economic reasons. That's criminalized. You know what I mean? So it's all these things are happening. To me, why would we start the conversation with where people end up? In prison, in cages, and not start the conversation with what got you there. So to me, abolition is a framework, meaning a belief, meaning way of seeing the world, but it's also an organizing strategy. It's a way of moving campaigns. It's a way of framing work. It's a way of organizing programs in your organization. So it's possible, to me, it's possible to do any of the things that we do with an abolitionist lens. It's possible to do work addressing law enforcement violence with an abolitionist lens. And it's also a daily practice. So if I know that I have car insurance that mandates that I have a police report if I'm in an accident, to me, an abolitionist daily practice is, instead of calling the cops and having them come, going to the station. It's a small act, but that's one less cop that I'm bringing out into a neighborhood, knowing what cops do in those neighborhoods. So it's also like a daily way of minimizing interactions with people who often cause harm in communities. So that's an overview. We can have whole conversations. There are books, there are webinars, there are YouTube that you can see. But to me, it's related to this conversation in terms of, even if that mama living with HIV or that mama who is struggling did the harm that you're accusing her of, why do we think that putting her in a cage is going to make things better?
I don't
And not make it worse, which is what happens. Like, let's be clear. Like, separating families, putting mama in a cage data shows makes it worse. So then my question is, why are you really doing it? Because you said it was about the safety of the child. The child's not safe with mama not in the home. But you're about to say something.
No, I'm just gonna sit here with my mouth dropped the whole time because it feels like that. Like wow, you're able to articulate so many things that we often think about, and don't have the words to get into. That's crazy. So Antoinette's comment, she went back and talking about her experience a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
she's in the hospital. She's a woman that was born with HIV. So
Mm-hmm.
they told her not to tell any of the nurses in the hospital that she planned on breastfeeding because they could potentially cause CPS.
Mm-hmm.
So now this is a bigger harm, I feel like, because I can't even tell the people that are treating me or providing care for me what my situation is in fear of how you're going to respond.
Exactly.
I don't need your approval. I just need the support. And that is in the realm of your job is to support me in the decisions that I make, not the decisions you make for me and I'm expected to follow. So, even something, I like the idea of going to the police station versus having them come to you. We don't like to call police anyway, at least where I'm
Right.
from. We don't want no parts of it. So that would be a workaround would be to go down to the station. I had never thought about that. Um, what I seen or in my own experience now is like I hate to make this comparison, but like this secret underground thing that's happening where we know that we have to work around these different entities
Mm-hmm.
and structures. So like we're all whispering, down here and passing the person along so that
Mm-hmm.
they can get there when it shouldn't have to be a secret type thing. Like
I
I
love
should be
that
able to
comparison.
just go and receive the services that I would like to receive and it be that. But that secrecy, and I'll get you over to the correct pediatrician, or I'll get you over to the right OBGYN. And so many women do not have access to those resources. I talked about I know we're talking criminalization right now, and breastfeeding is just like on the front of my mind with this.
Yes, bring it.
Okay. I'm talking about how I was able to advocate so strongly for myself. Today, that advocacy looks different than what it would have looked like about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I have the support of, organizations such as the Well Project, which many people see as the face is white women, So I'm dependent on, these structures behind me that are led by white women to help
Mm-hmm.
me as a black
Mm-hmm.
woman in poverty,
Speak on it.
make it to where I'm trying to make it to. And I'm so grateful for that. I'll always big the Well Project up for that because without them, I wouldn't have many of the connections and the voice that I have to back me up. So now when I write a complaint back to the clinic that gave me the services that I was not okay with, I have some oomph, in it. I got somebody to back me up. I'm not out here by myself. And that is what I want so much to get out to the people is that, especially the women living with HIV, is that you are not alone. Find a support system. Find, like, there is more than likely somebody who has
Right.
been in a situation that is like yours, similar, or maybe exactly the same. Please reach out. You do not have to go at this alone. It can be so intimidating and you might feel like there is no support out there, but please, please, please reach out. They called
I
you a
agree.
national treasure. You're a national treasure.
I can't with y'all. But that's how criminalization is meant to work. And it's not my intent to be cynical. I think I can just be very blunt, but like my experience is sometimes part of how oppression works, namely violence and criminalization, is it makes us internalize stuff that was systemic from the get-go. And part of how I've seen it play out is exactly what you said, CC, of it isolates you, which literally when you're in a cage, that's what happens. Or when you in Louisiana, if you are criminalized under the HIV statute. You have to register as a sex offender. That's a form of isolation because it's so many restrictions literally on where you can live, where you can be, those sort of things. It's somebody in Louisiana, an amazing advocate, who talks about how as a mom with this sex offender, she can't even drop off her children. You know, in terms of like, you can't be within a certain number of feet of a school, but you have kids, you know what I mean? It's like it literally works to isolate you from your people. Then the system then blames you for that isolation. You know, you have a court date, you're the only one there. See, no one supports. Well, actually, because of HIV stigma, no one wanted to F with me. Then I'm blamed for that. So it becomes this like cyclical process where you internalize things that from the get-go are systemic. And also it's also historic. Like I was reading a comment about like it's in Black people's DNA not to trust. I mean, like before there were police, there were slave patrols. Why would I trust the person who's literally trying to bring me back to a plantation where I will die? You know what I mean? And like that is the basis for law enforcement as it exists in the US. And so that then plays out in a contemporary sense of, you can say, like I'm sure it's many people who have had varying experiences. Some hopefully are positive with law enforcement. That doesn't change that it is a system that is meant to maintain social order at any cost. It is not, and I think about this in terms of like safety, and I'm thinking of what Olivia said earlier about protection. That's what we're told. We're told that these HIV laws are about safety, are about protecting, people who are not living with HIV. And we're told it's in the name, Child Protective Services. It's told that it's supposed to protect services. And then we're the wild ones, like when we're sitting up there, like, not only am I not safe, I'm a lot less safe than I was like before this even started. Not only are my children not receiving any protection, they even have less protection than they did before this CPS quote unquote investigation from an anonymous healthcare provider even started. So to me, it's just important to name what's actually happening and to like say it's not true. Like it's not growing safety. Like how much money is funneled into law enforcement every year? Like thinking of what you shared, Cece, about your family, and I heard you mention, like drugs, and just thinking about this war on drugs and all that it's cost us, and how we've seen the exponential rise of prisons, of detention centers. We've seen law enforcement agencies across the country, big and small, get leftover military equipment. And no one can say that they are more safe because of it. In New Orleans right now, there's a whole campaign around these crime cameras. And the idea is like it's to keep safety. You know how many crimes happen right in front of the cameras? So our thing is, well, it didn't prevent the crime and it hasn't solved it. So what we paying for? Like one or the other. Okay, if you didn't prevent it, you could solve it. You didn't do either. So what it's for? And it's not just, in that arena, but I find it helpful to ask, is this really about safety, and whose safety? Not my people's. We're safe when we look out for each other, not when cops patrol. My people are safe when we have safety plans and check in and make sure that they have food, water, the things that they need for themselves and their family. That's what I know keeps my people safe. We're safe when we advocate and speak up and say no when necessary, and those things, not when this agency gets this increased budget or when CPS makes their routine quote unquote calls to my house. I'm just thinking of the experience in the hospital, in terms of what was needed in that moment. What's the quality of care if you're telling someone, like if someone knows I can't be fully forthright with this medical team because they might call CPS. That's now impacting that person's quality of care. How is that safety?
Whoa. And when you talk about safety, I think about how I grew up in a real small town in Georgia, and how my hands start sweating when I even think to, go back there or to leave outside of the city limits here in Philly. My hands sweat. I feel so safe when I hear, the reggae and the Caribbean music playing from the cars. Like I just feel like I'm in a safe space. And how many of my decisions and choices have been based off of the need of needing to feel safe. That's exactly why I still am where I am. Um, let's see. We usually get input from our CAB members to help guide these conversations. You have done so well. Like we're almost at time, so I want to make sure that we cover, at least a few points that were raised. Let's see. Are there any cases that helped or hindered women living with HIV? I think you kind of alluded to a case at the beginning. Do you have any experience where the woman living with HIV like came out on top? That was a major win for that woman.
Well, I actually think in the case that I mentioned is it started off just, super horrible in terms of intimate partner violence. Is horrible, even if it, like it was bad, like even if it didn't have the additional charge, but it ended up being very beautiful in terms of she was somebody who, for all the reasons, didn't talk about her status, and so suddenly, it's something that unfortunately is now known, right? It's something that's out there. And like, and just seeing her make the decision to be like, so I do have HIV, and what? Like, it doesn't mean like that what happened to me was justified. And so just like flipping something for her into this thing that's like, and what? The real issue is that I lost my housing voucher and made a decision to stay with somebody who was violent. And just seeing her just like make those flips and like focus on like what the like as far as what was happening, I thought was super beautiful. So it just was like an outcome. And to this day, of this woman is an amazing advocate. Is somebody who is not only super comfortable with her status, but I've seen her encourage others who are maybe newer, on their journey of living with HIV, and being like, look, it's going to look how it looks for you. Like maybe like now is the time to, be out your status. Like maybe that won't happen, but it's okay, because what works for you is what works. But any cases, I mean, it's a lot of like, it's definitely been times where like someone, it did look like the person was gonna, like the case was gonna move forward and the charges like were gonna move forward, and through some advocacy, having prosecutors drop the case. That's always a good thing. Like to me, one less person in a cage is always a reason to celebrate. And one less person in a cage and getting the support that they need is just like a reason to have a parade. Because like ultimately, like that's what I want to see is our, people having the support that all of us need. And was the question also some like cases that had more of a positive, but was it also like cases that didn't work?
It said helped or hindered women living with HIV.
Um, Definitely some of the ones that hinder, and of course I'm being general on purpose, not to give people's, you know, personal information. Um, some that have hindered, um, just the nature of our criminal legal system to me is the biggest hinder. Like one, you know, I'm a defense attorney. It's not that public defenders aren't good attorneys, they are. It's just that it costs to mount a good defense. And our state doesn't fund public defense. So folks don't have the money to mount the defense that's needed. You know, is like the biggest hindrance. So sometimes maybe like me not being a public defender, being a private attorney, I don't necessarily like hear about a case until like it's pretty far along, and it's a lot harder to like advocate and do that kind of work at a certain stage. So it's not like a failure of anybody. It's just like our criminal legal system, which really profits literally off of uh over policing, because it's so many people, you know, incarcerated, you know, it's so many people um in the system that they know, and the stakes are so high because housing's so scarce, you know, jobs that pay something are so hard that folks are doing what they can to get out and will plea if it means I can get out, hopefully get my job back, you know, be able to pay rent, all of that. And so like that to me like is the biggest hindrance, is the ways that like people like prosecutors, cops like know what folks are up against and really use that, you know. And also I've seen like people, not people, prosecutors and cops, maybe be specific, use the fact that someone's a mother as a reason to really force them into a really bad plea deal, you know, and to pressure them. And what's heartbreaking is sometimes I don't hear about it till after they've pled. And then, which limits options, because again, the law is a limiting tool from the get-go, and it limits options, you know, in terms of what to do. But that's something that you know, unfortunately I see. And just like the amount of people who are like really pressured into taking certain deals. And like I've seen judges in open court like say like of people who represented by other attorneys like use, oh well, she's a mom, as a means to like basically like as part of why this person, you know, is a criminal, you know, in these really like racialized ways. You know, like I remember you know, she was not living with HIV, but was living with a number of mental health challenges, some that were diagnosed in the course of her criminal case. Um, she was pregnant, and the ways in which like I had to really, really think and pray and strategize on whether it was going to be helpful to her case to like make it a part of the defense that she's pregnant, because just knowing how Black motherhood in particular, particularly working class Black motherhood, is criminalized. And I ended up making the right decision, and me and her talked about it every step of the way, and deciding to like use that as part of the defense for a smaller sentence. And it did work, but just the stress of that kind of gamble is just really hard on me, yes, but also on the person who, you know, stress isn't good in your life, but especially when you're pregnant, you know what I mean? Um, and so just like I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it, but it was just like just like seeing her, like I just told her, I was like, look, like this could be something that could make it better. And I will do whatever I can to like frame it and defend it in this way. And sometimes here's what could happen. So just those kind of decisions you have to make. It's just not fair on folks who are facing BS charges to begin with, you know?
And every time you like bring up someone having to go to court or anything, like I just imagine working my hourly paid job
Mhm.
where I have to request days off from work
Mhm.
and I'm not getting paid for it. And so now a bill is short, which is
Listen,
probably, maybe my rent. And maybe this is the last time my rent could be late. And now I have nowhere to live because of these BS charges that were brought up in the first place. Like, I'm not so far removed from that life that I feel that down in my bones. Like,
but you know
you,
whose bills are paid? That judge with our tax dollars offer us to come into court and reset the whole docket. Their bills are paid with our tax dollars.
I remember sitting at a red light one day and the person next to me had a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee and
See?
how I wanted that cup of coffee so bad, but I didn't have the $2 to get it. Like, I know that life. I know that life of going into work and not being paid enough already. You already tired of them. And now I have to come with you to a supervisor that I probably don't even trust and let you into that space of my life to let you know what's going on so I could get the time off. And had I not been living with HIV, this probably wouldn't even have to have been a conversation anyway. This, I think, it definitely speaks to the different intersectionalities, the different disparities, and this conversation could probably go on all day because criminalization affects everyone. But I definitely think that it's something to be talked about how it affects Black women who are living with HIV. Um, oh God, it just, and for the situations that we know about, the circumstances that have come across us both, there has to be a million more. I hope it's not a million more, but many, many more
Yeah.
that we don't know about. And that is what is the scary part to me, is that it's probably a lot worse. Whew. Okay, this is the last question. I think we have no time for it. So, has U equals U impacted any of the work that you are doing now that we can say undetectable equals untransmittable?
Um, I yes and no. It's impacted it in the sense that I'm excited like that more people are talking about U equals U. And I know I'm sure this is true other places like everywhere, but in Louisiana it's been some really cute like YouTube videos, like cartoons, like in super accessible ways, like talking about like U equals U. That's not, a 20 page scientific graph, that makes me fall asleep and I'm used to rather dense material. So I appreciate that. Like I appreciate anything that isn't assuming a certain education level for folks to understand. I also, yeah, so to me it's something that's great because contrary to popular belief, lawyers are like, all I can say is the amount of times like that I've had to educate other lawyers and judges on the means of transmission for HIV. It just goes to show like that education is not the same thing as formal education. You can have a lot of formal education and not have any sense. Telling you, just you have to go to a law conference. You'll be like, I could do this. I'm like, yes, you can run all of it. That's not a doubt. Um, so that's good. But I'm excited about that. What's challenging is I experience some people use um U equals U to be like, oh, so we're done. Like, oh, okay, well, good. Kind of on to the next issue. And I take issue with that for a number of reasons. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I will say we cannot construct a movement that leaves some of our people behind. Like, I think it is amazing if people are undetectable, and the basis for support should not be one's viral status. Because there are some people who will never be undetectable, even if they do the quote unquote right things, take their medication every day. And I hate that word compliant. Case in point, what do cops say when they kill somebody? He wasn't compliant. Yeah, that's a word that we use to talk about medication. That's weird. Side note, so like for me, that's just something that sticks out of like, it's important, it's a great tool. And I've seen in the decrim world sometimes it be used of like, okay, well, this is the basis for modernizing statutes. I hope not, because that's going to leave behind people. And my understanding often of who is undetectable is it does fall often on racial, gender, and class lines. So as a Black queer woman, I'm not about to support a policy that's leaving behind my people. We're not doing that, because we've seen that. We've seen what happens when when policies are constructed that only appeal to lesbians and gays and leave behind trans folks. So that's like, is my thoughts, is like, it's good, but then in many ways I find it sometimes honestly makes things a little harder, just keeping it 100, because now folks that were like, oh, well, we're done. It's like, no, we're kind of just getting started still, actually. So yeah, just that's that. And then I was talking about this as somebody who has used U equals U as a defense strategy in an individual case, just as a progressive lawyer, whatever you want to call me. It's not fundamentally as an organizer, it's not useful, it's not strategic to use an individual strategy as broad brush public policy. Because it assumes that experience is a universal one when it's not. And as part of how we get in this situation is we then make everyone's experience of HIV this one person's, when it's like, literally, where they say everyone has like snowflakes are all different. I don't know. I'm not from a place with snow. Maybe that was a bad example, but that's what I read. It doesn't snow here, but that's kind of how it is as well. It's like everyone's experience is different, so we can't have these like very, very narrow things used. But to me, like, that's not really a problem with U equals U as much as how people are deciding to interpret U equals U. But yeah, so I'm excited about it, but I also sometimes find it does make work a little harder. Just honest.
Oh, we appreciate your honesty. You're keeping it 100. This has definitely been a phenomenal conversation. Like, you could tell with, the comments and everything. So,
yes, popping, the chat's popping. Y'all doing it.
Yes, thank you. And one more time before we get off, I am going to display our survey link here. If you all could please be so kind to complete this little short survey so that we can get some feedback on how we're doing here and make sure that we're still meeting the needs of our audience. I would so gratefully appreciate it. Thank you again for attending our 18th episode of A Girl Like Me Live. Please join us again in May, where we'll be holding another session. We look forward to seeing you all there. And once again, thank you so much. I hope you all have a good day.